Good morning. This is Pastor Ben with today's Devo. I want to ask you a question. What is the Sabbath? And sometimes I get asked this question, why did the Sabbath change from Saturday to Sunday? And the short answer to that is it really didn't. But the word Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word for seven, and it also sounds a lot like the Hebrew word for stop. In the Old Covenant with Israel, God had commanded the Israelites to rest on the Sabbath and do no work. Now, generally, when we think of rest and Sabbath rest, we think of leisure, even maybe taking a nap. And for many modern American Christians, the Sunday afternoon after church nap is a zealously guarded tradition. The Jews of Jesus' day evidently had the same idea. They had developed a very complicated system of rules around what you could and could not do on the Sabbath to prevent any chance of ever doing any work on the Sabbath at all. And this system of rules was one of the primary reasons that they came in conflict with Jesus. Jesus didn't seem to think too much of their rules for the Sabbath. So is it possible that maybe they didn't really understand the Sabbath or the purpose of the Sabbath? Do we? Now, right now we are studying the book of Kings, and we're looking at the life of Solomon. And Pastor Chris pointed out a couple of weeks ago that God had said that Solomon would be a man of rest. The Hebrew word used here is nuach. So now we have a second Hebrew word for rest. One is the Sabbath, and one is nuach, or rest. Now surely, the Bible doesn't seem or mean to imply that Solomon was going to be a man of taking a nap all the time, that he would be a man of leisure. So what does this word nuach mean? When you study the word nuach, you get this idea of settling in. It's similar to the idea of maybe you move into a new house. And as you move into this house, you arrange the furniture, you get the rooms the way you like them, you get pictures hung on the wall, maybe you do some painting. You do a lot of work to make the house livable. And then you nuach into it. You settle into it. That doesn't mean you just take a nap and you never do any more work ever again. No, you do the work required to live there. Or preparing a meal. You imagine preparing a meal and you go through all this work and you make all this mess and you spend all this time getting the meal ready, and then you nuach. You sit down to partake of the meal and do the real task, which is to have the meal. Or something kind of what's going on with me today is I've been instructed to work from home, so I needed to arrange a home office. So I spent a bunch of time doing some work to get my home office ready, and then I nuach. I settled in to do the real work that this was all designed for. In Genesis 1, when we've got the creation narrative, something similar is going on. On the seventh day, God rested from his work. Now, God doesn't need rest. God doesn't need a nap. He didn't sit down and take his leisure. No. He settled in to work. He settled in to be God. And so you've got something very similar to our illustration of setting up an office. God spent 6 days arranging creation the way he wanted it, and on the seventh day, he sat down on his throne to be God, to go about the business of being God, to rule his creation. And one of the interesting things about the Sabbath or the seventh day in creation is that it doesn't have a morning and evening like the other days did. The picture is that the seventh day never ends, that it goes on forever. It has no beginning and end. This makes a lot more sense out of something that Jesus said. Let me draw your attention to John chapter 5. In one of the interactions that Jesus has with the Jewish leaders, they are criticizing him because of the things he's doing on the Sabbath. And he says in 5:17, in his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. If the Sabbath never ended, then it makes sense that Jesus would come along and say, now I'm doing the same work that God has been doing. So that makes me wonder something. Did the Jews get it wrong? Did they misunderstand what God had wanted all along from the Sabbath? Were they supposed to be taking a day off once a week from their normal work and doing God's work? I would posit that is exactly what they were supposed to do. If you were a carpenter, you were supposed to take a day off from doing your carpentry work, but that doesn't mean that you might not go down to another town or go across town and do some carpentry work for a poor widow who didn't have any money and couldn't do it herself. That didn't mean that if you were a farmer, you might not take a day off from farming your fields, but since the guy down the street was sick, go down and help him with his fields that day. Or any number of scenarios you can imagine where the Jews were supposed to be about God's work on the Sabbath. They were supposed to take a break from the work they were doing and do what God was doing, which was they'd be God. They were supposed to be an extension of God, helping out their fellow Israelite on that day off. I think that makes sense out of the things that Jesus would do. So Jesus would come and he would heal on the Sabbath, and they would criticize him for it. And he's like, listen, God's still working. Why wouldn't I work, and why wouldn't you? And so when we come today to our world, we're told that we receive our Sabbath rest in Jesus. And Jesus and God are trying to tell us that today, our job is to rest in Jesus and be about God's work every day. And not worry so much about whether or not we're resting or not working or following the rules, but that God expects out of us a sense of, I'm going to use some of my time to be about your work all the time, God, because I have rest in Jesus. Gives you a new spin on this idea, doesn't it? It's a sobering thought. Thank you so much for your time. Go be the church.